Just read the
People
pertinent
won't understand it anyway.
if you want to read any pertinent bits in Hebrew, you can.
Alright then.
If you feel it's necessary.
Right. Failure to sacrifice one of the bulls, the rams, the sheep, or the goats of the additional offerings brought on festivals does not prevent the sacrifice of the others. Rabbi Shimon says if the temple treasurers had sufficient funds for the numerous bulls that are required to be sacrificed on that day, but they did not also have sufficient funds for the accompanying libations, they should rather bring one bull and its libations, and they should not sacrifice all of them without libations. So the Gemara asks, with regard to these bulls, rams and sheep mentioned in the Mishnah, on which festival are they offered? If we say that these are the offerings of the festival of Tabernacles, this is difficult. It's written with regards to those days that their offerings must be brought in Numbers 29:18 according to their ordinance, and in Numbers 29:33 according to their ordinance. This indicates that no deviation from the Torah's prescription is possible. The Gemara answers, rather the Mishnah must be referring to the two bulls, one ram, the 7 sheep of the new moon, the Shavuot, as mentioned, and Shavuot, as mentioned in the book of Numbers 28:11 and 27.
Sorry. Take us through this. What's going on here?
So
go back.
This is what we call a shaklavataria, right? A give and take. Right? The Talmud is.
Let's go back. Let me go back to my text so I know what you're talking about.
Right.
Yeah. All right. So, which exact reference are you mentioning here?
Okay, so the references so far that are pertinent to our discussion are Numbers 28:11 and Numbers 28:27.
Numbers 28:11. One second. Numbers 28:11. Yeah, all right. So let me read that again. On the first of every month, present to the Lord a burnt offering of 2 young bulls. Yeah. 1 ram. 7 male lambs, a year old, all without defect.
Yeah. And then the next verse we've just brought up is 28:27.
Okay, all right, yeah, and?
Okay.
Which I didn't mention.
Didn't bring up.
Yeah.
So the Gemara, right.
Sorry, just on this point, do you remember what I was asking you to do?
Yes, I know. That's what I'm
Okay. Yeah.
Be patient.
Okay.
I was very patient when you went through your whole thing.
Yeah, of course.
The Gemara asks, the Mishnah mentions rams in plural. On which festival are multiple rams offered? If the Mishnah is referring to the additional offerings sacrificed on those days of the new moon and Shavuos as prescribed in the book of Numbers, in the verses I just mentioned, these offerings include only 1 ram and not 2. And if it's referring to the 2 rams of Shavuos that accompany the 2 loaves as prescribed in Leviticus, a term of being is written about them in the verse Leviticus 23:18, they shall be a burnt offering to the Lord. This term indicates that the offerings must be sacrificed exactly as prescribed in order to be valid. Consequently, one may not sacrifice fewer than 2 rams. So the Gemara answers this problem. Actually, it is referring to 2 rams of Shavuos that are prescribed in Leviticus, and this is what the Mishnah is saying. Failure to sacrifice the rams that accompany the 2 loaves, as prescribed in Leviticus, does not prevent the sacrifice of the ram of the additional offering prescribed in the book of Numbers. Similarly, the failure to sacrifice the ram of the additional offering prescribed in the book of Numbers does not prevent the sacrifice of the rams that accompany the 2 loaves as prescribed in Leviticus.
By the way, sorry, I wasn't mentioning Leviticus, you know that?
I know.
Yeah.
But this is mentioned in Leviticus.
All right.
Well, challenges. But that is the explanation that when the Mishnah mentions bulls and sheep, it means that even the bulls or sheep of the additional offering prescribed in the book of Numbers do not prevent each other from being sacrificed, i.e. the inability to sacrifice one of the bulls or sheep does not prevent one from sacrificing the rest. But when the Mishnah mentions rams, it is the rams mentioned here in Leviticus that do not prevent sacrifice of the rams mentioned there in Numbers and vice versa. But the failure to sacrifice one of those rams in Leviticus does prevent sacrifice of the other. Consequently, although the Mishnah mentions bulls, rams and sheep together, the halacha, the law, is not the same with regards to these different animals. The Gemara responds, the Tana of the Mishnah teaches each statement individually. The halacha applies to each the animals listed in different manners. Now the Gemara now cites a brisa with regards to the offering sacrifice on the new moon. The verse states in Ezekiel 46:6, which you quoted.
Yep.
And on the day of the new moon, a young bull without blemish and 6 lambs and a ram, they shall be without blemish. The brisa asks, why does the verse state a bull?
By the way, who's the authority that's mentioning this right now?
This is the Talmud.
Yeah, but who's talking?
No, it's the anonymous narrator of the Talmud.
So it doesn't mention the name of the person.
If you know the Talmud at all,
it sometimes mentions the name.
Yes, sometimes.
Yeah.
Usually, when it's going through, it doesn't give a name.
Sometimes it does. Sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah, but usually it doesn't. Right? Okay. Only when it's giving a specific.
All right. So there's no name.
At this point, it's not a name.
Okay, go on.
Right. So the verse states, and on the day of the new moon, a young bull without blemish and 6 lambs and a ram, these will be without blemish. The Brisa asks, why does the verse state a bull, when the verse in the Torah requires 2 bulls, as it is stated in Numbers 28:11, and on your new moons you shall present a burnt offering to the Lord, 2 young bulls and 1 ram, 7 lambs in the first year without a blemish. The Brisa answers, since it is stated in the Torah with regard to the offering of the new moon, 2 young bulls, one might think that it is not acceptable to bring fewer than 2 bulls under any circumstances. From where is it derived that if one did not find 2 bulls, he brings 1? Therefore the verse in Ezekiel states a young bull in the singular to teach that even if one has only 1 bull, it should still be sacrificed. So over here it's teaching you, why does it say 1 bull instead of 2? To teach you that even if you don't have 2, you only have 1, you can still sacrifice the 1, and it's not completely nullified. The Brisa now, so that's one part of it. The Brisa discusses the continuation of the verse in Ezekiel,
6 lambs,
which mentions 6 lambs. Why does the verse state only 6 lambs when the verse in the Torah requires 7? The Brisa answers, since it is stated in the Torah with regard to the offering of the new moon, 7 lambs. One might think that it is not acceptable to bring fewer than 7 lambs under any circumstances. From where is it derived that if one did not find 7 lambs, he should still bring the 6 that he has? Therefore the verse in Ezekiel states 6 lambs to teach that in the absence of all 7 lambs, one should still sacrifice the 6 that he has. And from where is it derived that if he did not find 6 lambs, he should bring 5, and that if he did not find 5 lambs, he should bring 4, and that if he did not find 4 lambs, he should bring 3, and that if you don't find 3 lambs, you bring 2, and if you do not find 2 lambs, you can bring just 1 lamb. Therefore, the next verse in Ezekiel 46:7 states, and for the lambs as his means suffice, indicating that one should bring however many lambs one is able to bring. The Gemara asks, but once this is written, why do I need the previous verse to state 6 lambs? Indicating that if one does not have 7 lambs, he should bring 6. So the Gemara answers, it teaches that although the minimum obligation is satisfied with even 1 lamb, nevertheless, to the degree that it is possible to seek more lambs, we seek them. Right? And the number that we'll then go to is the one directly below the one in Numbers, i.e. 6. Now the Gemara presents another law derived from these verses. And from where is it derived that failure to slaughter some of the required 2 bulls and 7 sheep of the additional offering on Shavuot, Pentecost, prevents fulfillment of the commandment with the others? The Gemara answers that the verse in Numbers 28:31 says, they shall be. The term they shall be indicates that the offerings must be brought precisely as prescribed. Now the Gemara discusses the meaning of another difficult verse in Ezekiel.
We don't need to go to the other difficult verse now, because you've just mentioned these ones, so let's do one at a time. So what I understand from it, and tell me if I'm wrong, is that he's saying the minimum is 6, for example, of 6 or 7, and the maximum is 7. Maximum is 7.
So he's not saying the maximum is 7.
So if you bring 6, it will suffice, correct?
He's saying that there's 3 degrees here.
Yes.
The lowest degree is if
any ram.
It's any number below 6.
Then
the second degree is 6.
And then after that?
And after that,
is 7.
The highest level is 7.
Beautiful, I understand. This is an unacceptable harmonization.
Why?
On 2 grounds, and I'll tell you why. Now he's attempted in the verses. There's no suggestion. Number 1, that this is the minimum, this is the maximum. That's an imposition. We were talking about what eisegesis means. That is an eisegesis, and I'll tell you why. If it was so clear that this is a minimum and this is the 3 levels that you talked about, then you wouldn't have such a different interpretation with other commentators. Let me give you one example. So Rashi, he says the following, trying to harmonize the verses. He says, on the Sabbath day, 6 lambs. I do not know why, he says. For the Torah says 2 lambs, Numbers 28.
I haven't actually brought up the Sabbath.
But hold on. But the Sabbath day can mean the Sabbath of creation, i.e. the 7th day of the week, or a holiday. And I say that this Sabbath is not the Sabbath of creation, but rather a holiday. Listen to this, which requires 7 lambs and 2 rams. This teaches that the total number of sacrifices does not preclude offering less, if necessary, which is what we were talking about, and thus, if one does not find 7, one should bring 6, and if one does not find 2 rams, one should bring 1, just as the sages expounded with respect to Rosh Chodesh.
Rosh Chodesh is the new moon.
No, but I understand what you're saying. But what I'm saying is, this is a failed attempt at harmonization. The reason why is this, very clear. When you have numbers, and this is expounded in some of the books of even the sages, when you have numbers, that is the clearest form of unequivocation. So at one point it's not saying minimum and maximum. There is nothing in the Hebrew, in the original, that says that's what the Bible does not say that. The Torah does not say that. Yeah, nowhere does it say this is the minimum, or bring only, or this or that. We have that actually in our Quran. You know, when it's talking about sacrifice, tells you what the minimum number is, maximum number, that kind of thing is specified. The Torah does not mention that. So this is an attempt to harmonize, which is trying to pull different strings together. That's why Rashi had to bring forward the holiday as another explanation. What is the Sabbath? Now they're playing hermeneutical gymnastics because they no, I understand. But what it is that you still are enduring a contradiction that would be much easier resolved with an abrogation. If you said that one is this and then it became like that, you still have to deal with the fact that the Torah has two injunctions talking about the same matter, but has different numbers. One is saying 6 lambs, one is saying 7 lambs. One is saying 1 ram, one is saying 2 rams. They are different. You're saying this shows a minimum and maximum. But if it was showing minimum and maximum, we wouldn't require Rashi, we wouldn't require the Talmudic scholars to tell us that. There would be words in the Hebrew language which indicate that within the text itself. So these are attempts to try and square circles.
That depends on. Let me just respond to that.
Yeah.
That depends on what book what the assumptions going into what type of a book is this. What type of a book is the Torah? Is it a book that is telling you all of the specifics, right, without you having to mediate on any of the words and trying to work out what's this word teaching us? This looks inconsistent. What's this trying to teach, right? Or is it a book which is right, which seems to be what you think it is, which is teaching us exactly what it is. It's saying exactly the words, and it'll say everything without you needing to think for yourself, right? So the way the assumption.
No, I don't think you're categorizing my response.
Okay,
no. I'm saying you have 2 verses, one in Numbers, one in Ezekiel. One of them is telling you that you have to bring one, and the other one is saying 2, 6 and 7, okay? So these are contradictory numbers, okay? You're saying, well, the way that they've tried to harmonize it, like Rashi and others in the Talmud, is that they've tried to say, well, actually, look, they've tried to say,
like this,
yeah, but that's not there in the text. Do you understand this point? I'm saying that this is something that had to be invented in order to try and square the circle, the contradiction. The Bible, the Torah does not mention this, or your version of it. It does not mention this. This is something they have had to try and do in order to try and navigate. And the idea that, well, if there's not 6, then let there be any number. What is that? That is completely. It's a cop out. Did you know that makes? That makes mentioning 6 superfluous. Let me tell you why. You said there are 3 stages, yeah? Imagine this, yeah? It says 7 and 1, it says 6 and the other, and you're saying that they're saying it can be any number. Alright, so if it can be any number, mentioning 6 is superfluous.
He already answered that.
Let me tell you why, hold on. Unless you want to say that 6 is the second best thing you can do, which is what you're going to tell me, but what I'm telling you is, that's not mentioned in the Torah. That's what he's saying, because he has to try and find the reason, he has to try and find the excuse for why the Torah is contradicting itself. Do you see the point?
I'll read you the answer to that bit one more time to see whether or not, because you might get something out of it.
Okay, fine.
The Gemara asks, but once this, i.e., verse 7, and for the lambs as this means suffice, has been written, do I need the previous verse to state 6 lambs, right in verse 6? That's useful, indicating that if one does not have 7 lambs, he should bring 6. Why should you have both? That's your question, and that's the Gemara's question. Well done. The Gemara answers, it teaches that although the minimal obligation is satisfied with even 1 lamb, nevertheless, to the degree that it is possible to seek more lambs, we seek them.
Yeah, that's his explanation. Yes. I'm saying that explanation is unjustified. There's no reason for him to have an explanation like that. Because if you're saying you can satisfy the number with 1 to 6, then mentioning 6 becomes superfluous.
Because if you teach,
why 6?
Because if you were to only say, if you only have 7 in Numbers, and then in Ezekiel all it will say is verse 7, and for the lambs as it's been suffice, then we would not know that there's any better thing to bring.
No, but there's
to bring 2 than to just bring 1.
There you have it, Josh. What you're saying is not what the Torah is saying. What? No, it's not. It doesn't. No. The Torah is not saying bringing 6 is better than bringing 1. That's what you're saying. This is exactly what the Quran warns you and the Talmudic scribes of doing, which is يُحَرِّفُونَ الْكَلِمَ عَنْ مَوَاضِعِهِ. You are literally changing the word from its contextualized meaning. You have to do that because in order to avoid contradiction, the Quran is criticizing. And there's actually one interpretation that says that this doesn't always necessarily have to mean that you're changing the words in literal form or taking things out and putting things in which we do believe has happened. But it also means that you have to decontextualize things in order to make sense of them. Because look what you're saying here, better and worse. These words are not there. You are inventing those words. You see, there's nothing like that. And let me ask you one question.
Yes.
People don't know this, and it's true. We as Muslims, I was quite surprised to find this out myself, actually, when I was doing my own research on the halakha. Because this is what we're talking about, isn't it? We are talking about the halakha. We are talking about the Talmud. But what I found was really interesting when I was doing my own comparative research was that the Sharia, okay, thusly understood, it uses something called usul al-fiqh, or the principles of extrapolation. So we have things like al-khas, wal-am, al-mutlaq, wal-muqayyad, which are generic verses, specified verses, and all that. I was surprised to find that Jewish people had that all along as well. Which makes it easier for me and you to have this conversation. Do you know why? Because I will ask you a question. What principles of extrapolation are being used? Do you see?
Yes.
Do you see?
I'll tell you exactly which.
So let me just make sure the question is very specified.
Yes.
In order to extract a ruling in the halakha and in the sharia,
yes,
there must be an overriding principle which will be used not just in this circumstance, but in every single circumstance wherein which such a similar situation or verse or combination of verses arise. So what I'm asking you is, first of all, what principle of extrapolation is being used? And number two, give me another example, or give me some other examples where these principles are being used consistently.
Right, let's take it.
Do you see the point? Do you see the question?
Okay, so
because otherwise, what it will be is like special pleading. Because if you don't show me that there's a principle that's at use here, an overriding principle which we are using to extrapolate all the verses, then you're using, what you're doing is you're inventing a principle or inventing a rule which only aims to try and rectify one contradiction at the detriment of all the contradictions,
right,
or all the other verses, or all the other halakhic rulings that exist in the Altar. Do you see the point?
Yeah. So I'm gonna have to go through the principles.
Do you remember the principles?
Yeah.
Go through them with me, please.
Kal v'chomer is a 40 yori.
Pardon?
Is a 40 yori.
Okay.
Do you know what 40 yori is?
Yeah, A4 Torah, like A4 Torah, yes, go on.
Zera shava is an equal, it literally means equal cutting. It means if this word means something here,
Exactly.
it means the same thing over there.
Exactly, yeah. And what do you call these principles again? Remind me?
These are the Shlosh Semiras HaTorah Nejeshes Pohem, which means the 13.
13, yeah, exactly, yeah. I remember them. I remember going through that and I was quite surprised because you have generic and you have specified verses as well. Yeah. You have what we call it khas wal am, or the mutlaq and the muqayyad.
We say klal ufrat, general and the specific.
Exactly. So tell me now, what principle are you using to make this? Because what you said here is that one rule, 6 is better than 1.
6 is better than 5.
Yeah. Now, for you to say that, you have to provide evidence. You have to give me a principle that you're using to derive that conclusion, hermeneutically, or in this case, halakhically. Go ahead, please.
Right.
Go through them, say it loud so I can remember as well. Go on, say it loud.
I'm just saying in Hebrew.
Say it in Hebrew, I'll try and remember it. Go on. Say it lower, slower. What does that mean?
The klal is from general and specific.
Specific, yeah.
The protocol and from specific and general.
Okay, yeah. Say that one again. Yeah.
A general, a specific, and a general.
Yeah.
Yeah, which judge them
specific on in a general.
With the specific.
Specific, yeah. We have the same principle, by the way.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. You need the mukhassis. It's called something which specifies the general. Say that one again. which is
general, which needs nifrot, which is needed for a specific.
the general which is needed for a specific.
It needs, which needs the specific needs it.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm losing it. Well.
Yeah.
Nifrot shehu tzarich lichlol, and then the opposite.
Okay.
כל דבר שהיה בכלל ויוצא מן הכלל, למד, לא למד עליו ויוצא, אלא למד
Say that one again.
כל דבר שהיה בכלל.
No, in English.
Anything which was in a general thing, ויוצא מן הכלל, and then it went out from the general thing.
Which is specified, yeah.
ויוצא מן הכלל.
Yeah.
לא ללמד על עצמו יוצא. It's not coming to teach on itself, the fact that it went out.
So, what's the 13 things called again?
Shlosh esrei midos.
Shlosh Eshra, which means 13. Shlosh Eshra. Eshra is like Ashra, isn't it? It's like 10, isn't it?
Yeah.
Eshra means 10.
Yeah, it's esrei.
Yeah. Esra, yeah. I remember this now.
Shlosh esrei midos haTorah nidreshes.
Achad, Shnayin, Shlosha, Arva, was it? Arba, Shamesh, Shesh. Yeah? Shesh, and then Shava. And then Shamanya, and then Tessa, and Asa. Yeah, you got. I got this, brother. Yeah,
very good.
Brother, we got this, brother.
Very good.
Yeah. And so you're saying.
Your Hebrew is much better than my Arabic.
I'll tell you. You said Shalosh Asa. Shalosh Asa. So that's 13, yeah? So that's 13 we say. Shalosh Asa. Go on. Yeah, Esra. Sorry, go on. So you got 13. You went through like 6 of them now.
Yeah, I'm going through.
But I tell you, I've been through them, and you're going to find this very difficult. Because there's no principle where you can get this. This is a contrivance.
כל דבר שיכול בכלול, למד או למד עליו ויוצא למד על הכתוביות. כל דבר שיכול בכלול ויוצא לתאיתן effort.
So what you're basically, what he's using
to try and harmonize it.
Someone's made that up, but they're not using the principle.
Exactly. You see. We couldn't get away with that in usul al-fiqh. You'd have to show you're working out. But which is good because we on the Sharia and Halakha are very similar. Islamic law and Jewish law, basically. Huh?
It's innovation.
Now I'm just moving my body, man.
It could be, you're not going to like this.
Go on.
You're not going to like this. It could be an asmachta.
Which is again?
An asmachta is not one of the 13. It's in one of the other lists. It's in the 38.
And the 38 reminds us of what that is?
Of Yossi Aglili. He gives another list.
Which is not accepted by the majority. I remember this. This is not accepted by the majority. The 13 is mujma alay. It's everybody accepts it.
Yeah,
this 38 is very weak.
Yeah, it is a bit weak.
Yeah, and actually one of the most aberrational things in the whole halakha.
But I'll tell you something.
Why are you bringing this to me?
I'll tell you something.
Yeah.
Because asmachtas are used. Because asmachta, you're right in saying that most of those rules are very rarely used.
Yeah.
But asmachta is used all over the Talmud. It's used everywhere, right? There's
Which one is that again?
amount of things. Asmachta means that we have a concept that we already know, and we find a verse that looks like it would be teaching this, and then we say that this is what that we can learn this from that verse.
Yeah, but that's nothing to do with what we're talking about right now.
So
no. Josh, can you see what I'm saying to you right now?
It would make sense based on how the Talmud states it here. I would say, because it says here.
No.
Because it says here.
Yeah.
Let me read this. It says. The Brisa discusses the continuation of the verse in Ezekiel, which mentions 6 lambs, and it doesn't start by saying Right? It says, why does the verse state only 6 lambs and the verse in the Torah requires 7? And then it gives you the answer. But then afterwards it says, from where is it derived that if one did not find 7 lambs, he should bring 6?
Yeah, exactly.
Therefore the verse in Ezekiel states 6
Yeah,
lambs.
yeah.
So it's not saying it in response to the contradiction. We already knew something. We already knew, right, and we could ascribe this to oral tradition, right? We already knew that if you have less than 7 lambs, you can still bring whatever lambs you have to the temple.
We only think that because of the verse in Ezekiel, right? That's the only evidence.
No, because evidence for an oral tradition is not necessary to be provided in the Talmud. They don't always bother.
When you say no, are you talking? No, hold on. Yeah, please. You have 2 verses.
Yes.
One that's saying 7, one saying 6.
Yes.
You're telling me that rules can be you can't have now new rules.
Yes.
Unless they're derived from this, all right?
So, look, I'll throw a question out there.
Okay.
What was being done during the time when the temple was up? Were people, right, if there was ever a time when when for some reason he couldn't bring 7 lambs, right? He didn't have 7, right? So what did he do when he didn't have 7? Right? Did he simply not do it at all, or did he bring less than 7?
No, but now what you're doing, with all due respect, Josh,
Yes?
is you're trying to use your own rationality above and beyond the text, which is not acceptable in the Jewish tradition.
Well,
so now you've had to.
When we look at the text, we have 2 things. We've got what it says, and we've got our brains.
No, I know.
God wants us to use both.
But
God
our
wants us to
brains is
reconcile
our
between
brains
and
is
the
not good enough here. We've got 13 principles
Yes.
that most halakhic scholars agree with, Talmudic scholars, sages, whatever, agree with, commentators, and you have not been able to show one of them which solves this contradiction, which shows you that you must, and we're going back to the point, either you introduce abrogation or you endure the contradiction.
To introduce abrogation will be unacceptable, because abrogation is the idea that God is changing and not unchanging.
No, it's not, because that's ridiculous actually. It just means that he's changed, it just means that his will has differentiated in one time over another. For example, do you believe in creation ex nihilo?
Yes.
Alright, so God created at one time, not another.
Yeah, God continues to create.
Okay, but if you believe in creation ex nihilo, it means that he created one time and not another, right? Which means that he has to post-date his creation. Which means that he had a will, which post-dated his creation. It doesn't mean that he changed his mind from, I'm not going to create, so I am going to create. It means that he just post-dated that his will, or the creation of his will. Likewise, you can have, God decided that the rules will be X and this time, and that was appropriate, and that the rules should be Y and this time, and that should be appropriate. That's not against God's nature. It doesn't change his immutability. Do you see the point?
I mean, even if you say that, it's still not going to completely help you, because in Exodus chapter 31, it does say that Sabbath is an eternal covenant, right? So that's still going to be an issue for you.
No, it's a covenant. No, well, here's the thing is, we've already spoken about abrogation, okay?
Yes.
We have to see if it's possible. First question, is it logically possible? Absolutely. God is not incapable of abrogating, correct?
God is not incapable of anything.
Okay, no. God is not incapable of anything, but if God does certain things, it disqualifies him from being God. For example, if God becomes a man, can God become a man?
Can God become a man? Is
If God becomes a man, it would...
Asking me if God can become a man is like asking if God can draw a square circle. It's
Beautiful. It's impossible. It's impossible.
God is.
So exactly that. So it means it's an impossible statement relative to the majestic God, right? So
it's illogical.
It's illogical.
Right?
Yeah. It's impossible.
It's a sound that doesn't have meaning.
All right, I accept
it's like
it.
saying, does God?
Yeah, exactly.
What does that mean?
Me and you agree.
I don't know, can
Listen,
he do it?
me and you agree on that point, Josh. Meaning it's in the realm of impossibility.
Yeah.
We're talking, can God do something, which is a meaningless statement.
There's no such thing as covenant by God, basically.
Okay, yeah, agreed. Now, what I'm saying is, abrogation doesn't fall into the intellectual impossibility category when it comes to God, correct?
Abrogation not falling into impossibility.
It's not like square circle.
I think it is.
No, it's not.
The idea that God changes in any way.
No, but we're not saying God changes. You said that you believe God created ex nihilo.
Yes.
All right, so which means that there was a time where God created and a time where he didn't create.
Because God's above time.
Yes. So there's a time that he created and there's a time that he did not create, correct?
It's a difficult thing to say.
You said that he believed that creation ex nihilo.
Yes.
creation ex nihilo means God created in time and space. There was a time equals 0 moment.
Right.
All right. If God created in time, that means there was a time where God did not create.
Right.
All right. Like for example, there was a time where human beings did not exist,
Right.
which means that God is forgiving. Do you believe God is forgiving?
Yes.
All right. There was a time where, although God is forgiving, He didn't manifest His forgiveness because there was no people to manifest it on.
Right.
All right. It doesn't mean God is not God is changing because He's doing something now functionally that He wasn't doing before.
Right.
All right. So the ability for someone to do something doesn't diminish if there was no object of doing it too. If I put you in a desert island or in a place with no people, and you're a loving person, a generous person, you having no subject to do it to doesn't mean that you are no longer a loving or generous person.
I think it does.
No, it doesn't mean that.
I think that's exactly what it
No, it doesn't.
Because when we say somebody is loving, we mean that he is in a subset of people who do loving things.
No.
If you don't do loving things, you can't be classified.
Is God forgiving?
God is forgiving.
Beautiful.
The fact that He forgives.
Okay, now hold on. Did God have the ability to forgive before human beings were on the earth?
I think that's a contradiction in itself.
So He didn't.
I think that's a self-contradiction.
So,
Because,
hold on.
because the idea that you could be forgiving with no one to forgive doesn't make sense.
It does make sense. I'm asking you a question.
I don't understand.
You believe in creation ex nihilo, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know what that means?
Yes, creating something out of nothing.
Beautiful. So there was nothing, and then God created something, correct?
Yes.
Beautiful. So if there was nothing, and then God created something, there was a time where God did not create something, correct?
There wasn't a time when He didn't create, because before creation there's no time.
Okay. There was an instance, or there was a conceivability, all right, or it's conceivable that God can be a creator, but there's no creation.
Before there's
By the
any
way,
creation,
you
God's not
cannot
created.
believe. This is blasphemy on your level. It's huge blasphemy. Let me tell you what. Of course, it's blasphemy. So you're saying that before God created the world, God was not the creator?
How could He be? He didn't create anything.
No. Does He have the capability to create?
Of course.
Ha.
But He's not yet created.
No, that we agree.
So
But
we
Josh,
can't call Him a creator. When
Josh.
He's not yet created.
accepted, but He is the creator in the sense that He can do it.
Because He's omnipotent.
Right. Accepted. He's forgiving because He can forgive. It's part of His attributes to forgive.
Right.
All right. Now, this is important because what I'm telling you is the fact that God doesn't do something is not indication that He can't do it.
The fact that He... Say that again.
The fact that God doesn't do something is not an evidence that He cannot do it. So the fact that God did not create at one point is not evidence that He couldn't create.
Right.
Right. Same. What I'm telling you is the same. So just because God did not create, it doesn't mean that He's not a creator. So if you can post-date creation, it doesn't mean that now you're changing. It doesn't mean you're changing now. It means that the functional attributes of God are being manifest at a different time.
Right.
And in fact, if you say that that's not possible, that will be limiting God. That God has to be always doing the same thing over and over, and there's no room for will. Like God is not a willing God then. Then God is forced to do everything. In that case, there's no will. So that's why I'm saying that if God has the will to do and not to do, because if you don't have, what is volition? Volition is the choice of X over Y. Do or don't do. In that case, it's not a contradiction to God's will and His attributes, and it's not it doesn't put His immutability into compromise when we say what? When we say that God decided that these rules should be applicable in X time, but in Y time, these other rules should be applicable. And if this is a contradiction rationally, then it's also a contradiction that the fact that there was no universe, nothing, as you put it, and then God created a universe is also a contradiction. So we have to now admit that the fact that God can abrogate is not a contradiction to His attributes. Do you agree with that?